So Layla, I hope that your internet connection has regained its oomph as we move into the next part.
Let me know if you can't hear me and I will move to a different room.
Okay, I could hear that bit, so that's a good that's a good step for now. Okay, so we're going to move on to the first of our panels, which is called Searching for the Commons. And so I'll be chairing this part. We're going to actually start off with a short film, which is a short video blog post that was created by Deirdre Nelson, one of the artists whose work is in the exhibition, and she'll be part of this panel. So Deirdre created this blog post while making her work for the We Are Commoners exhibition. And as you'll see, the work celebrates acts of commoning that Deirdre found and identified within 2 kilometres of her flat in Glasgow. Okay, so let's watch the film and then we'll come back with the panel to open up the discussion.
When first getting involved in the project, I suppose I was quite interested in the idea of commoning as an act and, you know, the idea of sharing common resources. So I began to think about my local area and surrounding streets and what was going on in that area, ways that people were commoning. And also began to think, you know, closer to home of my own flat. I live in a tenement in Glasgow, and, you know, tenement living is a form of commons. We share gardens, we share, I suppose we share our hallways, and there's acts of commoning that go on within a tenement, such as sharing chores or sharing, well, during COVID, we've been doing a lot of sharing food and helping each other in different ways. I also began to think of my own flat and thinking about things that maybe I do there that would be considered as acts of commoning. I used to do Airbnb, and maybe it's not so much commoning now, but I think when it first started, it was definitely an act of commoning. Bartering, I do a lot of bartering with friends and neighbours. Also do a project called Tin Can Tuesdays, where we share food with the local food bank. We cook and gather food for the food bank. So within my area, there are quite a lot of projects. There's a music lending library, there's a tool library, a swap market, repair cafe, which I'm involved in. There's also public spaces, Queen's Park Arena, that's a shared space within the park. I also began to think about COVID commons and what was happening during the pandemic and how acts of commoning were happening within the area, things that people were doing together or new things that were started. So began to think of maybe a way I could represent these. So thinking about mapping and thinking about, you know, everything from my flat out to the surrounding streets around. And then I had an idea maybe to do a sort of like a guild of commoning, where I actually create badges or some sort of celebration of these projects or some sort of group that would bring the projects together. So I've been thinking about the idea of badges, and I suppose a little bit like brownie badges or scout badges or the old guild badges, and looking also at techniques such as gold work, which is a technique where threads are laid down and then they're stitched on top. So I'm looking at stitches and different things that I could do to represent these badges. So I've been looking at map of the local area and thinking about where things are within that space. So this is within 2 kilometres of my apartment. And first of all looked at green spaces and realised I'm very lucky to have so many green spaces around, but then realised it was not only these green spaces, but between each block of tenement flats in Glasgow there are lanes which have become common spaces. People have started to use them for outdoor spaces, and particularly during COVID as well. And then thinking about where the projects are placed within this. So this is just the beginnings of starting to plot where these projects are. So I've started thinking about embroidering a map or embroidering a map, and I've been using threads which I've dyed from plants in the park, and there's everything from apple to ivy to bramble, and I managed to get some fantastic colours, and this connects very well with the idea of commoning. And I suppose one of the other things I've been looking at is foraging, and how people are using common spaces to gather food. So these colours will form the badges, and I've begun to embroider this map using some of the threads that have been used or have been naturally dyed, and using this technique, the goldwork technique, where threads are laid down and then stitched over the top. It's starting to look a little bit like a globe, I suppose, in a way. So it's my little area, my area of 2 kilometres around my house. So from this, in the exhibition, I hope to display the map plus the badges which relate to each project within the space.
Hi everyone. I love that transition from the grand scope of history that Peter shared with us to the microcosm, that kind of micro world of Deirdre's local area. So time for the panel. So if my panelists could join me, joining us will be Deirdre Nelson, who we just saw, so a maker who creates textiles which explore humour, place and social history. Justine Boussard, an independent curator and creative producer whose work in the exhibition is a collaboration with jeweller Alice McLean, and she'll tell us a bit more about it, I'm sure. Patrick Bresnahan, a lecturer in the Department of Geography at Maynooth University, and Leila Dorney, who we've already met, senior lecturer in the Department of Geography at the University of Exeter. And both Paddy and Leila have done a lot of work exploring commoning and ideas of commoning in various contexts and dimensions. So can I just check that all of my panelists have got their cameras on? I think I can see you all. Yes, that looks good. So to start us off, so much that we could talk about. Deirdre, I think if we can start with you, kind of picking up from the film. I love that little, insight into your working process. I wonder if you could say something about how was it kind of looking for commons in your area? Was it something that you immediately could make a list of, like, all of those places, or was it more of a hunt, or was it more of kind of thinking in a particular way?
Well, the very first time we all met together, I realised I was trying to just understand what commoning was and what the commons were. I had an idea of what it was, but I wasn't really sure. And I remember at that first meeting thinking, that's my local area. My local area has so much. And so I had already begun to think about the things that were happening around my space, and also the way people live in Glasgow in tenement flats and with shared spaces. But when I started to look, I realized that there was so many examples, and in the end, I found that there was nearly too many examples to put on the map. I'd like to do continue the map, because there's so many other things that are popping up. Things change a lot and over a space of time, and so I think there's more and more to add to the list. So it wasn't really a problem at all. I think the problem was trying to feature everybody.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing to hear, because I think, as you said, when we started when we had our first network event, you were kind of maybe engaging with the terminology maybe of the commons for the first time, and then once you put that head on, I suppose I love that you were kind of making those connections straight away with things that you were familiar with.
Yeah, and I suppose I realized that I do commoning acts all the time myself. I think it was that nice realization, rather than being overwhelmed by the terminology or the you know, I suppose the history or the academic aspect to it all. I think it was quite nice to realize that, you know, as a maker, I do this all the time. You know, I'm involved in ways, and working with the communities I work with, I'm involved in commenting all the time. So it was a nice realization.
It's really inspiring, because I think it helps all of us to think that we could look around and you know, notice things in our area. Justine, if I can bring you in, because your work with Alice is also about kind of, in a way, kind of searching for commons or highlighting commons that we might not otherwise think of in that way. Could you tell us a bit about your work and your search for the commons?
Yes. So I'm Justine, and I work with Alice McLean, who's a jewelry designer and an artist educator. And myself, I am a curator, but I have a background in design history and still very much interested in keeping that very much as part of my practice. And our collaboration started a few years ago when we were actually trying to find ways of making a maker and a design historians collaborate together in a sort of non-hierarchical way. And we were both living in Peckham, South London at that time. And we were wondering, there's so much change, such rapid gentrification around us. How come some places don't change? So what is the mechanism between something that actually stays there? And we started our inquiry with Peckham Rye Common, and that's why we fell into the story of the commons. And we were wondering, okay, so there's this bare triangle of grass here. There's the park next to it. There's the busy high street, but what is this triangle doing here? How come it's still there? And we discovered that it's been there for centuries, and that the reason why we still have it now is because in the 19th century, a group of local residents actually fought to preserve it because it was under threat of being developed and built on. So to tell people that story and make sure that it is more known than it actually is, because there's no plaque, there is nothing that tells that story on the common, we created these little tokens, which are made of etched steel, laser etched steel. And so on one side, you've got the shape of the common, and on the other side, you've got the symbol of the goose that Peter has spoken of so eloquently just before. And we actually have the other half, the half of anti-enclosure rhyme on it, which is slightly different to the one that Peter said, like a slightly different iteration of it, which is, it's very bad in man or woman to steal a goose from off the common, but who shall plead that man's excuse who steal the commons from the goose? So we distributed these tokens onto the common and had conversation with people about, you know, public land ownership and what the commons mean today, and really trying to highlight the fact that the reason why we have these spaces is because someone cared and someone fought for it at some point. And the second project that we're exhibiting in the exhibition is actually a new commission from Craftspace. And we were really keen with Alice to look at a contemporary common, and just to make sure that we create some dots between acts of commoning across generations. So we worked with a formidable group of plot holders in Birmingham, in Perry Bar, who have fought to preserve their allotment, their common, against, again, being built over as part of the Commonwealth Games development. And they won. So back in the last summer, we created this, we co-created this token with them. I did a wonderful workshop where they shared their ideas for the shape, for the form, for the words. And then Alice turned that into a very beautiful etched brass token that we gave them. So that's the work that we've been doing over the past few years. And we hope there'll be many more of these tokens. For the moment, we've got 2.
Love that, kind of thinking historically and noticing a common, but then kind of noticing something that's happening now. And I know that exactly you've got that idea of being a good ancestor and thinking ahead, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea here is to make people realize, especially the plot holders that we were working with, that what they've done recently in 2019 is as important as what the commoners of 7 generations ago did, because it will have an impact for generations into the future. So it's all about connecting those dots and realizing and making obvious that commoning needs to happen and happen again and happen across generations for future generations to benefit from as well. It has to happen across chronologies as well as geographies.
Lovely, thank you. Paddy, if I can come to you, I'm wondering this idea of searching for the commons, as someone who specialises in thinking about commons, do you notice them all around, or are there maybe particular places or particular contexts where you think that you might be able to highlight kind of contemporary commons to us?
Hi, nice to see you. Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, watching Deirdre's little video there, you know, watching it earlier, and then also reading about Justine and Alice's work, you know, the thing that really sort of comes across is this sense of how, you know, the practices that they're looking at, or the you know, the communities that they're looking at, it's not so much about the physical spaces, even though it's happening in physical spaces, and physical spaces are important, but what happens in those spaces. And that's about the kinds of work that happens there, and about the ways in which those spaces are shared and organized, and the way resources are shared and circulated. And, you know, that's all the commoning part of it. And I think the way that's important is because this also comes up, and there's a reference to something in the blog post that Justine and Alice wrote, which is that, you know, you could have, you know, state-owned land, or you could have privately owned land, but you could have commoning still happening in that context. And this idea of it not necessarily being some kind of formal ownership, like community-owned X, but more about the kinds of use rights, the ways in which things are used and circulated. And that there's an example that comes to mind that, like, it, you know, really struck me from a few years back. It was this little video that was posted on YouTube, and it was of this kind of incident that happened where there was a football courts in Oakland in the Bay Area, and there's loads of kids playing on this court, and it's like this big game of football, you know, that, I mean, I remember playing when I was a kid, maybe other people do too, but they're largely kind of Hispanic and African American. And then at some point, this group of white guys, I mean, they are white guys, and they are tech bros, you know, they've got t-shirts saying Facebook. I mean, it's not my thing, but they come over and disrupt the game, and they have a piece of paper, and one of the guys says, "Guys, off the court, it's our turn to use the court." And the kids are like, "What are you talking about? It's your turn." And he says, I've rented it, like this is our booking form, like we booked it. And so the municipal authorities had started leasing out the courts, which hadn't been previously leased, you know. And so there's this really great moment that's captured of this collision of a kind of exclusive right to use this court versus the kind of use rights of these commoners, these kids. But it's state, I mean, it's public, it's a court, it's a municipal authority court. And the back and forth between them is just this complete sort of incompatibility of these ways of thinking about this court. And what I think about when I think about, I don't know, like the kinds of, you know, even what Justine was saying there about the kind of particular incidents of the commons and how these reverberate through history. And obviously Peter Linebaugh is the sort of, you know, the voice of that, the one who's been so powerful at doing that, is that the reason why these particular incidents reverberate so much and affect us so much is that I think that they sort of clarify that this is the struggle between the kind of exclusive ownership, you know, this, which is the bedrock of sort of, you know, capitalism, and then this other thing, which is around use rights and commons, which is a bit fuzzy and unclear and is worked out. But ultimately, it is one that is open to everybody, because the kids in that example I just said actually say to the tech dudes, if you want to play, you can wait your turn. So we're not saying you can't play here. It's you know, that you know, you're excluded, but there are ways of sharing this that we're you know, you have to follow, and you can't just pay for it. So I think that those particular incidents are very powerful at sort of, yeah, sort of, you know, articulating where the politics of the commons is, you know, in that collision. Yeah.
That's a really great example. Thank you for sharing. I think these kind of concrete examples, I think we're all going to be remembering the clash on the court. It's a, yeah, really sticks in the mind. Layla, I wonder if we can kind of open out from those examples and think about, can we think of commoning as a kind of ethos? So, you know, Paddy's saying it's not necessarily about kind of formal ownership of something or a kind of formally established set of rules, but maybe something that's more open and fluid. I wonder if you could think about that.
Yeah, and I think echoing Paddy's point, the ownership isn't at stake here. It's the relations that take place in the production of the commons, which is at the crux of commoning. I suppose I've got a couple of points in relation to that. One of them is that sometimes something can be held in common and appear to be open when in fact it's not. And I think we need to commons are and what an ethos of commoning means, when often that perceived flatness and perceived democracy can kind of hide other inequalities that might not be immediately visible. So I suppose to give an example, I mean, let's take it back to the court right. Now, within that example, this didn't happen, but it could have been that there were kind of gender and racial privileges that were being surreptitiously used in order to exert power. And on the face of things, there might be a very kind of egalitarian way of distributing access to the site, but there's a kind of underlying de facto recourse to those existing inequalities that can be occluded by thinking about commons as open. So I think it's very, very important that when we celebrate unproblematically the openness of the commons, we don't, we also pay attention to what that might hide, what disappears from view when things are on the surface very, very open. Mm-hmm. So that was my first kind of caution, really. My second point was to do with what this ethos means, and I suppose this is something that I think about, particularly in relation to the work that I've been doing with Linda Brothwell, in relation to taking responsibility for our immediate world in the context of 10 years of austerity. So Deirdre, in your talk, in your film, you mentioned a number of projects that happen, projects about sharing, projects around, a food bank, about people taking charge, about people saying, we have a problem here, we need access to these things and we're going to make it happen. And there is a sense to which these acts of commoning have been accused at times of kind of undermining or undermining a fight for the state to do more, or for local authorities to do more, and how acts of commoning where it's about self-organisation and self-management of resources locally can kind of give local authorities and governments an opt-out, because they can say, great, we're not going to run this library because you're doing it and that's fantastic, so what's the point, we're not going to fund it anymore. So I think I wanted to draw attention to these kind of critiques of commoning in order for us to not kind of unproblematically celebrate everything locally that we think of as commoning as great. On the other hand, and this came through very strongly in the work that Linda and I have been doing together, we do live in a world which is becoming increasingly dilapidated, which is becoming increasingly starved of shared resources, of public things. And in all reality, this is not going to change anytime soon. So within that space of pragmatism, we have that decision, don't we, of thinking, well, are we going to let this slip and wait for somebody to come and sort it out for us, when in all likelihood that isn't going to happen? Or are we going to adopt some kind of consolatory ethos that enables us to take responsibility, to keep a sense of, to build something collective, which is a direct consequence of a lack of public investment?
Some great tensions there. Thank you for flagging them up. It's I think commons are and should be kind of quite charged political concepts, and we need to keep reminding ourselves of those, that you can both celebrate and critique at the same time, and kind of, you know, hold those tensions together, I suppose. Right, we're out of time, but I wonder if I can put Deirdre and Justine on the spot, and in one line, if you could say something. You know, we've got a lot of artists and makers and kind of community organisers, people working in the public sector in different ways here. I wonder if you could say one inspirational line about what people might go away and do, and how they might look for the commons outside their door, down their street, in their town. Deirdre, is there something you can say to respond to that?
Oh, well, I suppose after Leila's talk, I would say look for them, but challenge them at the same time. You know, I think that's something that's come out through that is, you know, question. I mean, we can all find things around our area, but I think it's to actually question why they're there, or who's commoning, or whether it's commoning or commons. Yeah, that's more than one line, but
yeah, no, that was great. And Justine, any final thought from you?
I would say maybe look for your closest green space, and the shabbier, the smaller, the better, because that's where the greatest stories are. I've now moved to a different neighborhood. I'm in Walthamstow in North London, and there's this very small park next to me. And I was wondering, okay, why are you here? What's your story? And it used to be a really huge common called Markhouse Common that has been, like bits of it has been saved a few centuries ago, and now we've got the remnants of what used to be really big, and I'm grateful that it's still there. So ask questions, because if you've got an open space next to you, someone has fought for it, and they're worth remembering.
That's brilliant. So thank you to all four of you for the panel. Too brief, I'm sure we could carry on, but we're going to progress to the next panel. Just before that, we're going to have, I promised you, an interlude. So we're going to screen sections of a film that documents a project led by Gelawesh Walid-Carney and Lisa Bjorna Linnet, that's shown in the We Are Commoners exhibition. You'll see that groups of undocumented migrants in Norway have met around drawing tables. They're sharing memories and stories and working outside using the natural materials each season had to offer. So we're going to just screen a little bit of this film before the next panel.